Good evening, everyone. My name is Gunnar Soros, and I'm the host of Beer Blab. And as always, I think he's to my right, is my co-host Jonah Di Pasquale, otherwise known as the Hoggle. Be sure to check him out because he hosts an awesome show every Thursday night called Bike Chat, where we talk about all things bike. But tonight we're talking about things that are beer related. And we were just talking about some different things. I had posted up the link to our Facebook group. Be sure to check that out because we're talking about doing some sort of March Madness Craft Beer Blab bracket competition. And hopefully that'll be a lot of fun. If you're into that, give that a check out. And then also get on our mailing list. And hopefully if you're on the mailing list, you got a message yesterday from me reminding you about tonight's show. If you didn't get the message, then maybe check your spam mailbox and put Craft Beer Blab at Google or at gmail.com into your contact list because maybe it went into your spam list. But here's the link to the mail list if you want to get updates on what's going on in Craft Beer Blab, emailed to you probably once a week, maybe twice if there's something special going on. But today we got a very special guest, RoundTableHops. Very exciting things going on because if you don't know about it, there's kind of this hop shortage going on, and there's various reasons for it. We could blame climate change possibly for some of it. Also, the huge influx of craft beer breweries that need hops, and not just need generic, I guess, hops like Anheuser-Busch needs hops, but need special hops for their special recipe beers. And so hopefully RoundTableHops, if I have it right, with their unique farming system, will help to alleviate this hop shortage. So let's get started.
That's the hope.
Right. And this is our guest, Ben. And are you the founder of RoundTableHops? Or I guess let's get the whole story. Go ahead and explain to us.
Yeah, that sounds great. I am currently 1/4 of RoundTableHops. So it's myself and 3 other co-founders. And we started this business about 3 years ago as a concept. And most of our time up to this point has been dedicated to research and proof of concept. So we about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, we built a pilot greenhouse in Forest Lake, Minnesota, and have been growing hops hydroponically there for about the last 14 months or so. It's gone great, and now we're looking to expand into a commercial facility to start actually supplying commercial quantities of hops to local breweries. So that's the plan.
Excellent. So I don't know if other people are familiar. I mean, I'm not terribly familiar with the hydroponic system, except possibly, that there are other hop farms, tomatoes I've heard of. And then the other big one is obviously marijuana, which is illegal in our state currently, but I guess medicinally there's you can get a prescription, I guess, but not for like marijuana like Colorado. So hydroponics, that's where there's no soil, right? It's all
correct.
Okay.
So there are a lot of different vegetables are currently grown hydroponically. Some of the big ones are tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, lots of different kinds of peppers, things like that. So hydroponics has already influenced the produce world quite a bit, and we're trying to bring a lot of the advantages from that technology into the world of hops.
Great. And what? Go ahead, Jonah.
Go ahead. Yeah. So, based on your ability, your capabilities, or the facilities that I'm taking a look at here on your site, obviously you get you're experiencing winter as you are here in upstate New York, or obviously Rochester. But
yep.
Does that because it's obviously an indoor, and I don't really want to say greenhouse. I guess I just want to say climate controlled. You're able to produce year round, I take it, because of the process. Is that correct? Or?
Correct. Yeah. So our greenhouse and sort of growing in this 4-season controlled environment allows us a lot of advantages. One of those being year-round production. So fresh hopped beers are theoretically no longer a something that's only available in the fall. That's something that can happen year-round. Our yields are significantly higher than traditional growing locally here in Minnesota that maybe traditionally are only available from Europe or something like that. So there's some pretty significant advantages that we've been finding. Currently it's it's winter here, and we currently have hops in the greenhouse. We have Hallertau from Germany and Pacific Gem, which is a New Zealand variety. And they're all about 5 feet tall and growing wonderful. So it kind of takes the seasonality out of hops.
Wow, that's
great.
That's pretty awesome. So I mean, I think that's an interesting thought that you just posed. That we were talking on some earlier shows that obviously there's for example, a few shows ago. If you want to go check it on replay, we were chatting about Bell's Brewery and Hop Slam, and that was kind of their, I don't want to really say it's a spring release, but that was a big deal. And it's interesting now with the facilities that you are instilling in and the process via hydroponics. That is an interesting concept, because again, what I'm hearing in my mind, and Gunnar, you guys can probably correct me if I'm wrong, is that is absolutely going to clearly change the availability or the supply of hops. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is it's definitely going to maybe redevelop or reintroduce a different style of beer, or a beer that was maybe seasonal and make it not so seasonal. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I do think that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, that's one of our goals. Certainly brewers are interested in that concept. Being able to differentiate themselves by having a year-round fresh hop beer is obviously something that offers up some great opportunities for them. In general, I mean, what we're trying to do is flip the whole industry on its head, and instead of a farmer growing a certain variety and then selling that to whatever breweries want their little slice of that pie. Sure. We could adapt much faster. Our hop plants show full yield and quality in the first harvest, 4 months. So we can essentially, no plants even go into the greenhouse until we get a contract for that plant. So like I said, rather than growing a single variety and seeing who wants it, sure, we can talk to brewers, get a sense of what varieties they want and in what form, whether they want it dried and pelletized versus fresh, and supply that to them. So that's the idea.
Well, and Nicole Whitty has a question. So have you seen any viruses or viroids on any of your hops?
Yeah, that's a great question. Viruses and particularly fungus are a huge issue in hops. Downy mildew, powdery mildew are two of the biggest ones. So far, in respect to those two viruses or funguses specifically, they require a certain amount of moisture to actually inoculate the plant. So being able to keep the humidity inside the greenhouse low enough where those spores are never allowed to inoculate, we've been able to drastically reduce the impact of fungus and pests. To the point where we had a spider mite infestation initially. We actually brought in some plant material with spider mites. We got that under control, and since then, in the last 14 months, we haven't had we haven't required a single fungicide or pesticide application since then. So hopefully that trend continues. I'm sure that won't always be the case, but right now we've been able to minimize pests and diseases just with environmental control.
Wow.
Nice. Oh, that's amazing.
That's great, and I think you bring up a great point that by controlling, it sounds to me, and I'm not a scientist, but it sounds to me like by controlling the environment, you really have a lot more control over the plants, whether it be, you know, pests or fungus or even viruses and that type of thing, just by the fact that they're in a controlled environment. So wow.
Correct.
So now you were saying earlier about obviously there's obviously like a screening process or whatever the stipulations are before you start to work with that particular species of plant. Now, again, I have Netflix. I watched the episode Weeds and the mother plant and this kind of thing. And obviously, if that sounds like a hysterically ignorant question, that's okay. But is that the same case with hops? I mean, is it like a mother plant, or is it just one plant, or how does that work?
Like in terms of different varieties?
Yes, and being able to grow those varieties.
Yeah, so currently there are several different varieties of hops in the world, and it's actually only a small portion of them that are suitable for brewing. The rest of them are more or less a weed.
Wow.
So in our case, we do clone. That's where we develop a lot of our rootstock from. So we take some more of our successful plants and use that as sort of mother root material. So currently we have grown 9 different varieties in the last year and a half, 14 months, and we haven't come across anything we haven't been able to grow yet. So,
nice. Interesting.
Now, the footprint that your indoor hydroponic hop farm requires, is that more or less than a traditional hop farm that's growing in the ground?
Yeah, as far as space goes, it's a significantly smaller footprint. We can get it's approximately 30 times the yield per acre per year as far as greenhouse versus soil.
Did you say 30 times? 30 times.
30 times, correct. So your average hop farm in the Pacific Northwest is about 450 acres. We feel like we can reach that same capacity in about 15 acres of greenhouse space. So drastically smaller footprint.
Yeah, that's pretty significant. And then obviously the plans, I guess, and I mean, not necessarily looking into a crystal ball. Is this something that obviously you're either trying to lead and pioneer? Is there future? Is there or are there future plans to scale this out, to take this to other regions? Is that something that you foresee happening? Because I mean, I would have to imagine. I mean, this is clearly, a no-brainer in terms of being able to sort of bring that shortage, of supply and demand. I mean, back to some type of normalcy, or.
Yeah, as far as scalability, the stage we're at now is taking the information we've learned from our pilot system and applying that to a 3-acre facility we're trying to build this year.
Mm-hmm.
So the annual output of that will be roughly 180,000 pounds, which is about 20% of the Minnesota hop market.
Oh,
so pretty significant.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then, I'm a firm believer that in the next 50 to 100 years, this is how hops will be grown. There's some pretty important competitive advantages that we have in terms of not only for the brewing industry, but also on an environmental side of things as well. So,
wow.
You would also say that it sounds like, so you get a 4-month. Basically a 4-month time from growing to harvest. So that means that you can harvest 3 times a year, perceivably, right? I mean, as long as everything goes.
Yeah, that's our current time frame. Is each plant gets harvested roughly 3 times a year. We've seen that be quite a bit shorter than 4 months in the summer. Okay. In the winter, it slows down. Obviously, day length is shorter, the light is less intense, so it averages out to about 4 months per harvest cycle.
Wow!
So 3 harvests a year.
Right. You had mentioned too that you currently you're only growing if you have a contract with a brewer for a specific hop. Can you are you allowed to say what brewers you're working with, or is that like a secret and you don't want to let it out, or I'll let you answer if you want.
Yeah, no, that's great. Happy to promote the people that have been supporting us. This is obviously a pretty bold idea, so we've definitely required some breweries to step up and support us. I just don't want to miss anybody. Let's see, our harvest that we have planned for the beginning of May is going to Barley John's. They're a really small brew pub here in Minnesota, and then they just expanded into a larger production facility in New Brighton. New Richmond. New Brighton is where their smaller place is, into Wisconsin. So they've been a big proponent of what we're doing. Big Wood Brewery in White Bear Lake, Hammerheart Brewing in Lino Lakes near my home here. Dayblock Brewing, Excelsior Brewing, pretty much everyone we've talked to, Fair State Brewing, has really stepped up and been excited about the possibilities of hydro hops. So
nice.
I'm sure I missed people there, but that's all right.
That's all right. So I have a question. So you're dealing, we often in this show we joke about, indie beer, craft beer, what's craft beer, what's not craft beer. What I kind of pose this question to you is let's say, Gunnar, you had mentioned it earlier, an Anheuser-Busch, and I'm not saying it's Anheuser-Busch, but how are you positioned right now to handle that? If you did get that knock on the door and it was somebody other than the smaller that mid craft brewing company in your local region.
Yeah. So we sort of look at craft brewing as less about people trying to define it by production volume and things like that, and for us it's more a matter of the intent with beer.
Sure.
You look at the brewer and their intentions. That being said, we don't really have a desire to supply hops to the larger Anheuser-Busch, Miller Coors corporations. This is specifically designed for craft beer. You see a lot of, because so much of the industry operates on contracts, you see a lot of what we define as macro bullying going on. So Anheuser-Busch steps up, and because they have so much more buying power,
right? Yeah,
they can sort of dictate the hop market. And we hope that our process here gives the craft beer community a little bit of a competitive advantage to fight back against some of that. So
cool. Nice. Nicole Woody has a question. So she says, only growing 2 different varieties of hops, and that you have a numerous amount of breweries to supply. So are any plans on growing other varieties?
Yeah. So really right now, we've successfully harvested 7 varieties up to this point, and our next harvest will contain 3 varieties. That maybe wasn't a little was maybe a little unclear before. So we have Cascade, Hallertau, and Pacific Gem. Really, the varieties, each variety is very temperamental, but like I said, at this point, we haven't come across anything we can't grow. So the varieties are going to be dependent on what brewers want. And we've definitely started those conversations and based our current varieties on those conversations. The biggest struggle are the proprietary varieties, which are your more common varieties such as Simcoe, Mosaic, Citra, things like that. Those are actually owned by proprietary entities, and you need a license to grow those. And we haven't pursued those licenses, but we're sort of anticipating some resistance there, I guess you could, to say the least. So
that's very interesting.
Yeah, so even though they have the license to that species or whatever, they're if you were to grow that particular species, you need to have the license as well. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes. So that contract from them. So let's take Citra for example. That's owned by Yakima Chief Hops, also known as Hop Union. Operates under a lot of different names. Sure. They license that variety to different growers. So those contracts dictate price and availability, and so they in that way can control the market and keep prices high on those varieties. So,
sure. Nicole Whitty had a comment. So she said the Monsanto of hops, and that pretty much what's going on.
Yeah, that's Hop Union.
Okay, and I guess I wasn't aware that there were. Is it patents that they have on them, or how does that make you think?
I haven't actually laid eyes on the legal proprietary documents to know if it's a biochemistry. I guess I'm not sure specifically what it is that's patented.
Right.
But yeah, it's something that's not available to grow commercially for other growers unless you obtain a license. So similar to like delicious red apples. There's certain strains of apples that have been developed with different universities across the country, and it's the same concept. So
sure. Interesting.
Nice. Excellent. Let's see here. Do you have any other questions, Jonah, or anyone else in the chat box there?
Fire away.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was, and now I actually I was reading earlier on, obviously this whole project came about via Kickstarter. We just had an awesome interview on the show that I host called Bike Chat. One of our guests was Bike Gab, and they do produce, so they will be producing leather goods for cycling. They had a Kickstarter campaign. The Hanger, also Jurgen Bennick, he was a Kickstarter. Well, but it just seems like the models for a good number of businesses these days lend themselves to this type of rollout or bootstrapping. Can you kind of elaborate on that process? Was it just, did you wake up as a collective and say, hey, we're going to do this via Kickstarter, or, was that initial rollout plan, we are going to start this in a Kickstarter mode, and go from there?
Yeah, I suppose, as sort of a grassroots operation for the last 3 years, Kickstarter was always on our radar with that crowdfunding platform. So for us, we waited. We had a lot of discussions about what the appropriate time would be to launch a Kickstarter, and we waited till last fall. The scope of our new project is pretty significant financially, and the amount of money raised through Kickstarter, although significant and very helpful, was just kind of a drop in the bucket.
Sure.
We can certainly leverage that towards legal assistance and mentorship of that nature. But the main advantage and the reason we chose to do Kickstarter when we did is sort of a marketing tool. You get to sort of bounce your concept, your brand, your logo,
sure,
all your company's dialogue against a mass audience and see how they react to it. So that was the main goal for us, was really to see how successful we could be in that sense, and see how well we could actually mobilize the craft beer community to get behind fresh year-round local hops.
Yeah.
And also a great way to get some merchandise and some swag into the hands of what hopefully will be our end consumers. So
sure. So do you work well with like I've got a couple good friends and colleagues that are I guess master brewer consultants. They work with these startups and brick and mortars. I want to open up my own microbrewery kind of thing. I mean, is that somebody who's an ideal good I guess, agent or catalyst for you? Because obviously, once this brick and mortar gets up and running and established, I feel like they need to have their shtick. Obviously, microbreweries are not as prevalent here in upstate New York. Maybe a little bit more Rochester, Minnesota, but we are certainly seeing the trend go that way. And I think to your point about being able to have the availability to have hops, to be able to have the resources to brew whatever they're brewing, would that make sense for that person to put them in that individual or that business in touch with you guys? Or
as far as from like a consulting standpoint,
or just to use you guys for supply is what I'm saying. Like, hey, you should talk to RoundTableHops is what I mean.
Yeah, I mean we've done a lot of work to sort of leverage ourselves as that person, as that resource for people. That's a huge goal of ours. This is not something, both on the growing side, but also all of the opportunities on the brewing side. This isn't something we want to play close to the chest. This is something we want to make available to anyone who's willing to try it. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely can see that, and that makes sense. I mean, clearly the way it looks like the product is meant to hit the marketplace. So nice.
Right. So let's see here. So Nicole has a question.
Agricultural degree. Yes. So I suppose I should explain the backgrounds of the four partners. I have probably the least experience or background out of all of them. I come from I have a 4-year degree in film and photography. So not at all related to what we're doing here. Came in handy for the Kickstarter, I suppose, but that's about it. Mike Machursky is my partner with an agricultural degree. He has some pretty good experience with hydroponics. He worked for Len Bush Roses, which is hydroponic roses, doing their integrated pest management. He's managed CSA farms and several other smaller operations in between there. So he's kind of our ace in the hole when it comes to the actual growing side. Erin Kaiser is a recent University of Minnesota Minnesota grad, and she graduated with a degree in environmental engineering. So she has sort of taken lead on some of our more environmental and social programs. And then Ted Reek is the business side of things. So he already owns a small chain of 6 liquor stores in the area. So he kind of has that background in running and managing a small business. So
awesome.
Yeah.
And hey, on another note, I see you guys just recently. I think it was. Did you have a mention? It was issue 109, a beer advocate, right? I think so. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that was a huge honor. Frankly, so that was another huge perk and huge advantage of launching a Kickstarter when we did strategically. We were published in 6 different publications. So the Star Tribune here in Minnesota, the Growler is kind of our local craft beer publication, and also Beer Advocate. And quite frankly, yeah, we're pretty humbled because there's really no way a 12 by 20 greenhouse should have ever made a national publication. So we're pretty excited about that and excited to see what that brings.
Awesome.
Well, I think it's a great concept. I mean, I'm surprised, it's like one of those things that it's like, why didn't I think of that? I mean, we take out environmental factors from it, and sure, growing hops year round instead of having one season, you triple that and get 3 times the harvest. I mean, And, as a home brewer, you go into the homebrew shop and you go to buy a certain hop, and sometimes, they're like, oh, well, maybe you should buy a couple because there's a hop shortage on Cascade this year, and they're not going to be very much. To be able to have more hops available, I think is going to be great. I mean, and I think your proof of concept has shown that it works and that it's going to be huge. I think, like you said, in the next 20, 30, 40 years, it's going to make, all sorts of farming, but hops, I think, because of our interest here, I think it's going to be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's going to be crucial. Go ahead.
Sorry, Nicole,
you have a question?
Any plans on getting your hops certified as organic? Only asking because she thinks there is a race to get more organic beers out there, since every ingredient in organic beer has to be quote unquote organic. Hey, great question, by the way, Nicole.
Yeah, great question. We've looked into it a little bit. The organic beer, I'll say, scene is a little turbulent right now. It's currently a certain percentage of the ingredients that need to be organic, and I'm not exactly sure what that percentage is. But you're seeing some beers that are truly 100% organic, and when we talk in terms of organic, it's not necessarily just the ingredients, but you also need organic sanitizers and cleansers in the brewery and things like that. So there's a lot behind it. We haven't looked into it that much, simply because it's not all that hard to pull off in hydroponics, actually. We just, if we end up going that route, we just almost want that to just be another aspect of our hops rather than a specific value proposition where we're only able to sell organic hops to organic breweries.
Sure.
We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into that space. So it's certainly something we plan on looking into and doing if we can. And there's certainly a premium to be charged for organic hops, but the consumption is also obviously quite a bit less. So.
Awesome. And for the viewer audience out there, again, Nicole did actually include a link to that article. Sorry, excuse me, bought my desk there, about the organic topic. So yeah, great question. And
fantastic.
We certainly see, for example, a lot of the packaged goods and the larger retailers here are defining more and more of their retail footprint to that. Another bizarre question: what about gluten-free and things like that? Is that any bearing on what you're doing? I know that just seems like an odd question, but I know I've got a couple of my friends that are, I know it was like Woodbridge, is a couple random beers. Is that something that's affecting what you're doing, or is that just as a whole other process question?
The gluten in beer comes from the barley and grain profile, so hops don't have an impact on gluten. That being said, I would say the quality in gluten-free beers, there's starting to be enough competition in that area where the quality is actually getting pretty astounding, and you're starting to see these gluten-free beers win medals in non-gluten-free categories in beer festivals and things like that. So gluten-free beers are starting to look for higher and higher quality ingredients, but the hops directly don't have an impact on gluten content in a beer.
Yeah. So that seemed like an oddball question, but that's why I was saying, because I think it was I saw Woodbridge for a while, and then wasn't it like Mission? Mission is another one. I think is it Mission. Yeah, Mission is another one.
Oh, Mission, yeah. One of my recent favorites that I've stumbled upon is Glutenberg. We just started distributing them in Minnesota, and they are honestly, it's a beer I would drink regardless of the gluten content. I don't have any gluten restrictions in my diet. Their beers are just good, so it's impressive.
Yeah, Nicole, what he says, I like bread in my beer.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
No,
I agree.
But on the flip side, so I have a friend that if you're gluten free, stick to other beverages. And it's easy to say, but so I have a friend that is for health reasons is gluten free, and unfortunately, he loves beer, and he found out about having to be restricted in his diet later in life, and so he has this love for beer that he can't necessarily quench. So a lot of the gluten-free options that are coming out, and like you said, they're making them as, I hate to say, oh well, as good as, but I mean they're making good beer now that just happens to be gluten-free. I think Stone makes one. New Belgium makes one now. I've recently homebrewed a couple of batches of sorghum-based beer that he tells me are pretty good. And yeah, go to distilled beer. I have a question. So I saw that you were drinking something. It looks like something dark. I want to say a porter or a stout, but I don't know for sure. What are you drinking tonight?
I have a Bell's Expedition Stout from, I think this is a 2014. So I grabbed a nice beer out of the cellar. It's no Templeton Rye, but it's pretty good. I'm a big fan of Bell's. And yeah, I've got a few different years of Bell's in the cellar, so I pulled a few out for this evening.
That's one of the things that is my goal is to actually try to again cellar a beer long enough. I mean, I'm envious. I know Gunnar, you did that a couple of times. I just two things. I don't have the palate or the patience to do that. I'm very much ADD. If I know it's in the basement, I'll go downstairs and drink it.
Oh
yeah.
But no. Especially some of the some of the
you're talking from the south. My wife picked up some High Alive from Saginaw City. So brought that back up and enjoying that tonight. Nice little IPA.
That's awesome. So question for you. We do from time to time, and if you may have heard Gunnar talk about it, where we've exchanged cooking supplies, but we've exchanged beers from our regions. And the funny thing is, it's interesting how you see certain beers are available more so in other regions. Like Nicole obviously doesn't have accessibility to some of the beers that I do, nor does Gunnar, nor do I do. Like for example, Surly is something that I don't have access to. Long Trail, for example, something that Gunnar doesn't have access to. Peak Organic is another one that he doesn't have access to. So what we've been talking about doing and elaborating, Eric, who's on the Blab now, he's out west. We're going to try to do kind of a little bit of a collaboration. And that's kind of one of the other nice things about the Craft Beer Blab newsletter and also the Facebook page is, we want to be able to share the passion, of our love for craft beer with each other. And if there's beers in our regions that we have accessibility to that, we walk into a packaged goods store every day, we're just like, ho hum. Like I'd love, to be able to have accessibility to Surly, which clearly I don't, but fortunately I know Gunnar and he's been nice enough to, hook me up with a package. Maybe we need to get you in on that one as well too.
Yeah, I'm all into to bottle shares and things like that. I've done several of them. I'm part of quite a few Facebook groups where people are always willing to trade and things like that. So it's the only way to get a lot of stuff. So
right, yeah, I agree. I definitely agree, and it's just amazing, here especially. I don't know if it applies to kind of you guys, but the distribution laws in upstate New York are just completely asinine. As far as what you had mentioned, we were talking about hop conglomerates and things like that. I mean, the beverage distribution companies are exactly the same way. I mean, it's just it's just a literal monopoly. Like for example, I have these conversations. I go on Untapped or Root Beer Advocate, and I see a beer, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I want this beer, and it sucks because I'll go into my better package store that's able to get these craft type beers or whatever, and they're just like, nah, yeah, we can't get it in New York State, which is nuts, right? And you'd sit there and say to yourself, why is that? That it isn't even so much that the manufacturers or the brewers can't get the beer to us. It's just New York State won't, bring them into the States. So just...
Correct. The politics of distribution are complicated and usually pretty asinine. And there's a lot. That's a whole nother topic. I won't even start on that. But yeah, it's really frustrating sometimes to see what is allowed to go where for various reasons. Barley John's, for example, one of the oldest brew pubs in Minnesota, when they went to expand into their commercial production facility, they went into Wisconsin simply because it was easier for them to distribute. So that's sure. Tax dollars that Minnesota lost out on, potential jobs, all that stuff. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So
right.
Yeah, Dan Cleland asked. He said New York having restricted laws. No, Sam. So yeah, actually, and again, I do know some of those laws. As I said, I have asked questions because of some specific beers that I was hoping that they were able to get. There's I think the number one factor, I think it's alcohol content. I think it's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of those, the heavy hitter, Royal IPAs and, I think it's anything over like 11.5 or 12% is where they kind of draw the line. And I don't know if that's just a bunch of bullshit or the wine industry kind of starts stepping on toes, whatever the case is. But that to me, I think is sort of, I'll have to do a little bit more, research for you. And so I've got a little bit better background behind that. But as far as I understand, that's kind of the way it is. I just always thought that it just was that the breweries or the distributors just didn't want to sell. Like, for example, like my question to you, Gunnar, is like, why would Surly not be able to ship packaged goods to Rochester or New York State for that matter? You know what I mean?
Right.
Another.
Sometimes part of it is the brewery wants to control their growth, which is I mean, totally understandable. You don't want to all of a sudden be having to supply to 10 different states when you only can make enough for 4. But so that's probably part of it. But they did build a new brewery, and then the fact that a lot of breweries do contract brewing. So so there's a brewery just south of us in Iowa that's like real close to the border. I went down there and went to go to their tap room, and just happened to be closed the day that I went. But later I found out they just started distributing up here where I live, and I found out that the beers that we get are actually contract brewed from a brewery in Florida, which then doesn't make sense. I don't, it must be cost effective for them to have their beer made in Florida and then shipped all the way back up here to be sent, around Minnesota. I don't know how that all works, but that's another, again, that's a whole nother distribution issue.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's crazy.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Ben?
Well, a lot of it, certainly there are some goofy laws in place, but it doesn't even always come down to that. It's the politics of certain discounts offered by distributors. So let's say you have a distributor and their territory is the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and Anheuser-Busch can step up and offer them some pretty significant discounts to carry mainly their brands. And so a brewery that maybe wants to expand into an area can't find distribution representation simply because they don't have the cash dollars to speak for them. So there's a lot of politics that go into it, and that's why people need to be aware of who represents certain breweries as far as distribution goes. When we look at, there's an obvious strategic purchasing happening from Anheuser-Busch of all these smaller craft breweries around the country.
Right.
And so walking into a liquor store and walking down an aisle and seeing maybe 10 or 15 different breweries represented on one shelf, but if you start to look closer, you realize those are all Anheuser-Busch brands, and that liquor store, that retail outlet, receives actual cash discounts to put those brands in the prime shelf locations and things like that. So when you talk in terms of distribution, a lot of breweries choose places to distribute where they can get the most appropriate deal. So I'm certainly not saying don't go out and enjoy your Goose Island and your other Anheuser-Busch craft breweries, but it's something we all need to be aware of, because it affects these smaller companies, these smaller breweries dramatically. So.
Well, that's huge, and it's funny. We've been all over that for a good number of shows, and have brought that up with a good number of our guests. And the funny thing is that, to your point, I mean, nice, Nicole, when he says leave my Goose Island.
I'm all for Goose Island.
I know, but in all seriousness, though, I mean, I think that because we are so tuned in to this industry, to this culture, we have a much better mindset of sort of like what's happening now, meaning, i.e., the average Joe or customer is not necessarily going to be readily able to figure that out. And you bring up a good point, where people walk into packaged goods stores and like, oh, well, Shock Top this and this brand that. And it's funny because I think you're right. I mean, there's a good number of beers that after doing this show for a number of weeks and a number of months, that we've been like, oh, well, I didn't know that. But it's just because we've become much more acutely tuned into those particular brands that have been, obviously acquired by, these big monster companies. In fact, one of the first ones that we talked about was one of my favorites, was Ballast Point. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was just like some ridiculous, like $1 million something buyout, $1 million plus buyout, I beg your pardon, of Ballast Point. And is it going to change the quality of the beer? I mean, it remains to be seen. But ironically, Red Flag Dan, who's not in here tonight, and Gunnar, you guys were busting my chops about it. They're making pineapple sculpin, for crying out loud. I'm like, I mean, come on, really? I mean, it's a great, it's a good, but I mean, to your point though, it's just like I think that's, I don't know. I've seen it in every industry. I've seen it in the bike industry. I've seen it in the snow sport. They just the manufacturers just start reaching to get customers' attention just because they get desperate. And I feel like any beverage, Nicole, whether it's the liquor industry, whether it's the beer industry, they start throwing fruit and things. And I mean, whatever. I mean, I don't mind, a wedge of orange or a lemon in my beer now and then, or a couple olives in my martini, whatever. But I mean, when you start coming up with these just ridiculous combinations of products to edge customers into purchasing your products, especially to your point about they're owned by these larger conglomerates. I mean, it definitely does cause some difficulties for the craft brewers, because the other thing too is the price. I mean, we've all said this. I mean, it's like I joke with my buddy who has the package store that I usually purchase some of my beers from. He's like, you know what? He's like, I don't make very much money off of these craft beers. He's like, but when you have the 4 for $5, wait a minute, 4 for $5, homies can go in and buy 4 16-ounces for like $5. Like, it's a no-brainer. I'm not slating the homies. I mean, this is just everybody in general. The college kids, I mean, they're looking at what math works in my favor, and especially
Right.
in the economy that we're at. Most of your good quality craft beers. I mean, Gunnar and I, we've talked about this. I mean, you're walking out of there spending $13 a pop. And in fact, sometimes you get into these like 4 packs, the Imperial Ale, the Imperial Stouts and stuff like that. I mean, it's almost 18 plus bucks, which is a lot of money, but it's good beer.
It is.
And at the end of the day, you get what you get. Like, for example, the week before Christmas, we did the Imperial Stout whiskey. I mean, God, I bought some Rasputin Imperial Russian Imperial Stout. Crying out loud, it was like $23 for 4 beers. But whatever. I mean, it was good beer. I mean, am I gonna run out and buy? Am I gonna run out and buy that all the time? Probably not. So I don't know. It just creates a lot of frustration. in the industry. And I liked what you were saying earlier about, we're not worried about, the quantity of who produces how many gallons. And I agree with you. I think that's total horseshit. I mean, if you're producing good beer, you're producing good beer. I mean,
Right.
obviously there's a difference between, Keystone Light, obviously, and Zombie Dust, whatever. So
Right.
it's a very, very interesting industry. And obviously as it develops, we start to see, certain things, be influenced by these bigger, conglomerates, which is, again, unfortunately disheartening to a certain degree. Nice. Look at Nicole, Rasputin on tap. Wow. Hardcore.
Yeah,
Good for you.
I know.
we were talking about
I,
as we were talking about the cost of some of these craft beers. So I went into the store. I think it may have been the Hop Slam week, and I bought some Hop Slam, and maybe so it was like I think $16 for a 6-pack. So it was a canned 6-pack for $16. Bring it up, and the guy checking me out, he goes, he looks at it. He goes, you can get a case for that much. I'm like, yeah, it's not this Hop Slam. It's not, I couldn't, Dan K. It was delicious though. And it is delicious. And that's why to me, that's where I justify paying for it. But I mean, this 22-year-old clerk behind the counter is looking at me like I'm nuts because I'm paying them, what he would pay for a case of beer. I'm paying for a 6-pack.
Right. Yeah, nice.
So,
Dan K paid $19 for a 6-pack here, and yeah, it's and I think that's the other thing as far as becoming. I don't know. You hate to be that person and say a beer snob or whatever, but I mean it is an acquired taste. Like for example, we were talking about earlier. Most people come into craft beer, the IPA's the first beer they discover, and then their palates start to broaden out from there. And honestly, this show has been great for me because I tell you what, I've tried sours, I've tried a couple other beers that I wouldn't normally, consider, session IPAs, whatever. It's been nice to have that exposure to those things. I said the other nice thing though too is it's good to really be able to understand, what's out there so that you're able to, have a better palate, of being able to enjoy craft beer. Nice.
Nicole has a nice little comment. I tell him I pay for a Mercedes, not a Pinto, because I want quality. That's exactly it.
Yeah. I personally, I'm very, very happy to pay for quality. I get that beers are expensive, and especially when you get into barrel aging, which happens a lot. Where I struggle and sort of draw the line is these larger corporations and conglomerates sort of leveraging their power to restrict the smaller guy from coming out with something quality. I feel like everybody should have a fair shot, and that doesn't necessarily mean as far as distribution, because I get there's always going to be politics in that, but that's where I have a hard time supporting something with my dollars, knowing that it's going towards actually stealing something from the smaller guy.
Sure.
That's where I struggle with it.
Well, I think you brought up a good point. Is I mean, not just the distribution aspect, but just the shelf space aspect, and I think it's illegal in a lot of states, and I don't know if it's actually illegal here, but the whole, that the liquor store will get kickbacks from the distributor and or the larger beer companies. And, here in Rochester, I think both of our major distributors are actually the macro beer company. So Anheuser-Busch distributes, probably 80% of the beer that we get down here, and then the other 20% is I don't think they call themselves Miller Coors, but they're owned by Miller Coors, which kind of goes into a whole another aspect, because to me, okay, well, the whole thought of that 3-tiered system was to keep the breweries separate from the distributors, separate from the retailers, and yet you have breweries that own distributors,
right?
And so how is that being separate? But that's a whole nother topic. But just the fact that the shelf space, like you said, if they can devote, half of their shelf space to Anheuser-Busch and not even have it seem like it's Anheuser-Busch because, well, they have a section for Goose Island, they have a section for this, and they have a section for that. All of a sudden, your other smaller local breweries don't have any shelf space because they just can't get in.
Right, and as someone in the industry, it's hard to keep up with who is owned by who. I can't imagine what it's like for an average consumer. It's just not reasonable to think that they would stay up to date on that information.
They have no idea. They have no idea. And I think I was just following one of my good buddies on Twitter, and he was just talking about this earlier today, and it was a packaging thing. They were talking about it's Don DeBrita, and it's DonDibrita, and he does a good number of things with craft beer. It's a company called Beer Dogging. At any rate, he had actually had a pic. He had two. He did a Snapchat of the other day of he had zombie dust in one hand and a bottle of Dos Equis, right? And the point that he was making, he's like, okay, which beer would you choose? And like we're all like, oh my god, the zombie dust is a no-brainer, right? But then when you looked at the Dos Equis, right, the joke of the design of the Dos Equis, it had that clean, the fonts and blah 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 blah. He's like, that's probably the beer that you're going to go for. He said, furthermore, just the perception of it having that nice label on it, you're going to think that Dos Equis is a better beer than Zombie Dust. Now, all of us here, and the audience included, know the answer to that. But to your point, about the average consumer, there's just no way they're going to know that. It's like, hey, go to the store, buy good beer. They're not going to sit there and go, Zombie Dust or Dos Equis. Oh, I don't know. It's a party. I want to impress my friends, with flashy, cool beer bottles when they're sitting there pepper mouthing by the pool, and they grab a Dos Equis. So, right. I think you're absolutely right about that. And I mean, this is almost bizarre that we're having this like, sort of like uncover conversation. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I mean, you're not, unless you're doing the homework like this or watching this or whatever, or spending time in Beer Advocate magazine or whatever. I mean, there's no way you're going to get this. Hey, this beer is owned by Big Box Company A. This is a craft beer. You know what I mean? There's just no way. So I mean, that's a great point. And I think unfortunately the average customers, they just it's a trial and error. And obviously in the meantime, the big package vendors win. And furthermore, Gunnar, the point that you brought up about shelf space is absolutely, I mean, it's like my buddy at the package goods stores. I mean, he puts all of the Genesee beer, the Budweiser, the Labatt Blue, I mean, all the mule piss beer, in my opinion, guess where it is? It's all up front. If I want the good stuff, whatever, Troegs, any of the better quality, Nitro Milk Stout, whatever. They're in the back of the store. Now, they're not necessarily in the back of the store by design. I mean, he's not stupid because he knows, to Gunnar's point, that these packaged goods, companies are giving them more money and payouts. And the other thing too, last point is, it's the stupid coolers. I mean, these companies have so much money to be like, yeah, I'll give you a cooler. Well, if you're small retailer guy A and you want more coolers to carry more beer, well, what are you going to do? Of course you're going to say yes, they bring the cooler in, and the stipulation is, their stupid beers, have to be in the front of your store. You don't care. You're still going to go ahead and you're still going to buy their packaged beers. But, it's just messed up.
I will counter argument to sort of what we're talking about here is I think some of the smaller craft breweries would maybe see a little bit more success in retail stores if they were to loosen some of their requirements on cold storage. Quite frankly, I don't understand the hard-on everyone has for having beer stored and delivered cold. Frankly, it depending on the style, of course, but the majority of beer does not need to be stored cold. It's not going to skunk, as a lot of people say. And, you take Surly, for example, who more or less requires their beer to be delivered and stored cold. Well, I think the retailer would potentially purchase more of your beer if they didn't have to keep it in their cooler space where competition was pretty tight. So there are certainly things the smaller people can do, but most of it does fall to the bigger conglomerates, they're clearly attempting to force those smaller people out.
Right. And so while we're talking about the fact that some craft brands are owned by larger macro companies, there is this app that you can get on iOS, Craft Check app, and I've tried it out myself a couple of times. And it actually works pretty well. The UX design isn't all that great on it, but you can scan a can barcode, and it'll tell you whether or not it's owned by a large corporation or if it is indeed truly a craft beer. So if anyone's interested in that, go ahead. Jonah, I'm not able to let Nicole in for some reason. Are you able to click on that?
No, I am not. I thought that was me. I do see the prompt that says show caller, and I'm trying to click in on it. So Nicole, we're not trying to brush you off. It's just you're not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's something going on with Blab at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird. But so hey, listen, we're at the top of the hour. I do need to jump into something else, but two things. I want to give a big shout out to our audience. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Again, my name is Johnny Pasquale, the co-host of Craft Beer Blab.
Cheers.
And it is great to have the folks from RoundTableHops here. Be sure to give them some loving. It's at RoundTableHops, again, doing some fantastic things in the hydroponics world, and we're looking forward to seeing more from them. They have been having 4C Blab issues. Well, Nicole, I'm going to bounce out here, so you can jump in the seat in just a second. But again, just a quick shout out. Gunnar, great job on tonight's show. Again, Gunnar is also co-host of Bike Chat. This week, Thursday, coming up, we're going to be speaking with Ira David of Pedal America. I actually did a test lab with Ira last night. Has some great things that he's doing in terms of advocacy for the cycling community. So I do encourage you to check that out. Again, it is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here, right now on Blab. And of course, your co-host with the most, Gunnar Soros, will be there. Also, too, please give me a follow on Twitter. It's at Jonah D. Pasquale. Anything that I could do for you, or if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, folks, thanks so much for tuning in to Craft Beer Blab. I am out. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, let me see. Nicole, I'm trying to let you in, but it's still not letting me. I do apologize. I don't like these little technical difficulties, but apparently that happens. It's Blab, yeah. Blab beta, that's what they say. Ben, I really want to tell you that I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah. I love your idea of hydroponic hop farms. I hope that it continues to grow. Let's see if Tommy Crowder, can I click on him? Nope. Sorry, Tommy, you can't come. No, unfortunately, yeah, it's.
We're a very elitist group here.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I try not to be. Before I sign off, though, I want to thank everyone else that's been here for joining the show. I do have a couple of shows to promote coming up. Next week, we'll be having on the Bro Basket. And I hate to sound sexist, but their claim to fame is that they're doing gift baskets specifically for men. That does include craft beer. So they have a couple of gift baskets that include craft beer. I don't think it has to be just for men, but that's who they're kind of targeting it for. And then on the March 8th show, we're going to have somebody from Oscar Blues Brewing come on. So that should be a great show also. There's the links to those if anyone wants to subscribe to those early and get reminded of them. I'm going to go ahead and, sexist basket making. Yeah. That are sexist. I do apologize for that. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.